Somo, uh, how are you? Thank you for joining me today. Pleasure to have you in this platform. What do you make of the video that you just saw now from Al Jazeera?
Yes, well, that video actually instantly reminded me of one of my key findings in my research on refugee mental health, and specifically pertaining to the mental well-being of refugee children, is that war is not partial to children. That video reported that 6 schools were hit by missiles, and one cannot say whether those schools are collateral damage or they were the direct target, but it doesn't matter. And clear that war doesn't differentiate between schools and working places. It includes everyone, and it affects children will suffer as much as adults, if not more, because of that tender age. So war is not partial to children. Children don't get exempted from war. They don't get shielded from the impact of war.
I'm interested to know why is your research looking specifically into refugee children? Is there a reason?
Yes, the reason is that I actually study refugee populations. But one of my key findings is that I found, so when I did my PhD on the mental well-being of refugee families, so specifically looking at the entire family, and I was looking at therapy, culturally responsive family therapy models that could help address the trauma that refugee families specifically go through. But as I analyzed my data, I found that the mental health of children were a major theme. In other words, there's a significant amount of refugee children with significant experiences that lead to poor mental health during the time that they're displaced.
I want to go back to that video that you just watched a bit. And when I came across it earlier, I tried reading a bit about what's happening in Gaza right now. And what I found was that over 21,000 children have gone missing since the war started. And this was last year, October. And one only wonders where those children are. If they are survivors, how are they? If you think about their mental development, physical development, and development generally. I want to know from you, in your article that I have here, you speak about school psychologists. I've never heard of school psychologists, at least not in South Africa. I want to know, in the context of the children that you focus your research on, what is their role?
Yeah, school psychologists, their role is to sort of, first let me give a little bit of an appreciation between the difference between educational psychologists and school psychologists. So in South Africa, indeed, we don't have the professional registration with the Health Council Profession of South Africa. We don't have a registration for school psychology. We have a registration for educational psychology, whereas in other countries, they have both educational psychology and school psychology. But in South Africa, educational psychologists work in schools as well as outside schools, and they do a whole lot of what school psychologists do. So when I say school psychologists, I think I use that term to be inclusive to both South African context and an international context. But really, educational psychologists in South Africa fulfill very similar scopes of practice, but school psychologists specifically in other countries, they work in schools. Whereas in South Africa, educational psychologists are able to work in broader context than just schools. So yeah, the role of school psychologists and educational psychologists is to really identify the mental health of refugee learners, but most importantly, to be sensitive that refugee learners are suffering from what we call cumulative trauma. So it's not trauma that's just based on historical events, but it's based on events across displacement. And displacement can be divided into 3 migration stages. Pre-migration, where, as you saw in the video, the schools are bombed, the communities are bombed, the communities are raised to the ground. And these 21,000 children, some of them are deceased, some of them are displaced with community members. Some of them are what we call unaccompanied minors. So they're displaced, they're by themselves. They don't have adult or relative or community members that they're traveling with. They're traveling by themselves, either with older siblings, or really identify and recognize that refugee children's trauma comes from different traumatic events across the migration stage. We also have what is called the migration stage, which is kind of like a time where refugee kids live in limbo. A lot of them internationally live in refugee camps where they're waiting to be granted legal asylum in the host country. And then while they are in post-migration, which is in the host country and they're legalized, then the daily stresses become the point of trauma. So it is really identifying for their specific refugee children, what is the most pertinent need? Is it addressing historical trauma from pre-migration? Is it addressing the daily needs that the children might be struggling through? So a lot of the daily needs, the struggle with poverty, right? Because parents don't have proper employment or sufficient employment, and so they live in poverty. Integrating in schools, perhaps the host language doesn't speak the same language as their first language, so integrating in schools, learning, making friends, socializing becomes difficult for these children, so they become distressed as part of that. And then, of course, to offer intervention based on triaging. What is the most important and pertinent and most urgent need that will help this child to begin coping and to thrive as a learner?
I want to make a quote on something you've just indicated there. Post-migration is the permanent resettlement into a host country after asylum has been granted. Post-migration offers families an opportunity to resettle in a new country and build their lives. But like any other life transition, it comes with its stressors. And then you go on to say, resettlement stressors for children include acculturation into new cultures, communities, and schools. And then you continue to elaborate. But then I wanted to ask, with all these things that you're mentioning and what I'm looking at here, does the age of children really matter? Let's say, for instance, we are talking about the setting in which they find themselves. They have to acculturate now. They have to be familiar with the space. Does it really matter that now they have to learn new cultures at the age of 3, 4, 5?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yes, it actually does matter. And it can matter. It can both be an advantage and a disadvantage. It can be a disadvantage if the child does not have access to resources that promote human development. So, toddlers can require a lot of healthcare, right? So, and if the healthcare needs are not met, they can have cascading consequences on their health, right? So, according to the life course theory, we know what happens to you at 3 will impact outcomes at 12. So, things like healthcare in vulnerable years, such as toddler years, is extremely crucial, right, for children. But in terms of acculturating, going to creche or schools, they're able to make friends easily. They're able to learn the new language easily. They're not really sensitive to kind of the cultural dynamics going on, right? So they can make friends across cultures. They can speak different languages. So the older the child gets, right, the impact begins to shift. So in primary school, where making friends is extremely important for development and acculturation of children. If there's a discriminatory and rhetoric against immigrants, right, that can impact and isolate the child. That can psychologically impact the child's self-esteem and self-perception. So the age does matter, and it impacts different milestones for the child. Having said that, children acculturate better than adults because children are really too aware of the microaggressions, right? And children are very open to learning new cultures. So while I was working with the refugees in North Georgia, I found that parents often complained that children want to adopt the new culture and leave that indigenous culture behind. Whereas the parents want to hold on to the indigenous culture because that's the sense of identity. But that's a positive for children. They want to get to know the new culture. They're interested, they're eager. So if they're given the opportunity and the space, they can actually acculturate easily and openly, because this is new and exciting and interesting for them. And where children thrive in acculturating, that actually helps the family, because what they do then is they begin to, so for example, if the family's language literacy is low, children can become interpreters, right? Children can become access to resources. So children acculturate better than adults, and children can become, if they're given the space to thrive, they can actually become an asset to their own families in transformation.
I saw this in one of the modules that I'm currently taking with Inisa. It's one of the language modules, beautiful language modules that Inisa offers. And what is indicated there is that, at a young age, I think before 8 years old, more or less, children learn languages easily. It's easy for them to adopt new habits, cultures, etc. But when it comes to adults, it tends to be a bit difficult.
Yeah, that's very true. That's absolutely 100% true.
I want to quote here. You make reference to some of the spoken words by certain participants. I was terrified. I didn't know what was happening. I saw everyone running and I had no idea why. Everyone was screaming. When war broke down in my region, we were taken to a stadium, which was a soccer stadium. I stayed there for about 4 days. There are so many people and lots of disease and massacring. Then things went bad to the worst. The weather was awful. It was raining and blood flowed everywhere. We were swimming in blood. There were so many wounded. That has stayed with me. It won't go away. At 5, I had no idea what a massacre was. This is a 5-year-old. This person narrating this is a 5-year-old, was rather 5 years old when he experienced this, when he or she experienced this. And what they're saying is that that experience will forever live with them. But then we've got professionals like psychologists. I want to know what role a psychologist can play in trying to get into an individual's mind and to just declutter or wash away such memories. Is it possible to do that as a psychologist, or do you need to be hypnotized?
So it's difficult to erase people's memories. We as psychologists, we don't work on erasing people's memories. We work on decreasing the impact, the emotional and psychological and spiritual impact of those memories, right? We want our clients to be at a place where they can remember or recall those things less frequently, because what happens with post-traumatic stress disorder, right, is that the memories are recurring to a point where you cannot focus on anything else. The memories are intrusive. They come anywhere, anytime, and they stay for long, and one cannot stop them, right? And so we want to decrease all of that, right? So we don't want to erase the memories, but we want to, so to say, decrease the power of those memories. We want people to be able to think about that event and not feel distressed. We will not feel the pain that they used to feel. Because when you have post-traumatic stress disorder, all the senses can become engaged, right? You can feel the emotional pain. You can smell the blood that you used to smell. You can smell the fire. So all your senses become engaged. And it happens as if, the memories, the kind of power that the memories have in PTSD is that things can seem as if they're happening to you in the moment. Right. We want to go ahead.
No. I wanted to ask, in South Africa, before 1994, we were experiencing a very bad oppression, apartheid. And I wonder if the reason why we keep being reminded of what used to happen is what you are explaining now, so that we don't forget what happened in the past, but also in us not forgetting, we don't become aggressive people. But I often see people get aggravated whenever documentaries showing what used to happen then air on television. Even when we watch Sarafina, some people would get highly emotional and they would make negative utterances against white people. I wonder if we do achieve that objective when we do such, if we keep those memories existent.
Yeah, if we keep engaging with the memories, so if people are being continuously exposed to the trigger, if they're continuous triggers, and one hasn't gone through the process of healing, then those triggers become anchors for the memories. The memories keep having the same psychological and emotional impact, right? And so if something is a trigger or an anchor, one should decrease participating in that until healing is complete, right? And so, yeah, I think that really we should find a way to address these anchors, these triggers, right? That keep opening up those wounds, those historical wounds.
All these things that you've explained, what you've shared so far, reminds me of what happens in South Africa after every X number of years, more or less 10 years, we see acts of violence against foreigners, usually Zimbabweans and Nigerians, xenophobia as we call it. I wonder if xenophobia has the same effect as what you've written about here on refugees.
Yeah, xenophobia does have a certain rhetoric that is against immigrants, right? It's perpetuating that. And really it is, it adds, so the first thing that it does is that it is distressing to refugee populations, it's distressing to refugee children, right? So it adds to the trauma. In other words, it adds to the cumulative trauma. So let's say a child might have started with X amount of trauma. Then if you add the distress, then it becomes X plus one, and so it really becomes a lot of trauma for children, and it doesn't allow them the space and the opportunity to properly heal. It doesn't allow them, because it's adding to the already existing trauma. It doesn't allow the children space to acculturate and thrive, right, in the host country. And so that's what rhetoric against immigrants is perpetuating. It really is leading to distress, and it's a barrier to children's mental health. And it's not just xenophobic rhetoric in South Africa. I said I studied my PhD in the US, and there was a lot of that as well. Anti-immigrant rhetoric, right? That really disables refugee children from fully participating into the host country's culture, from the host country's education system. And in the long run, these will be children who can contribute to the host country's economy. But if they're not given the proper opportunity to attain the education, to have good health care, then they're not going to be thriving adults, and it's kind of like, it's counterproductive. Xenophobic attitudes are a barrier, and they add to cumulative stress.
I see what it does to foreigners that would be residing in that country. If we use South Africa as a case, I see what it does to Zimbabweans and Nigerians, or other African foreigners, because we do this with our African brothers and sisters. But when it comes to our own children, because they are also here, they see what is happening, they exist within the space, how do they get affected?
Okay, that's a really, really good question. Children learn by socialization, and socialization happens by observation and by mentorship. And so when they observe, right, adults presenting a certain attitude, they learn from that, right? They learn through the language, so the terminology and the labeling we use, they learn through that. A child might not even know what the term or the means, but they'll use it anyway. They learn through attitudes, right? And so they learn to present those attitudes. And definitely when children come up with behaviors on their own accord and nobody corrects them, right? They learn that perhaps those negative behaviors are right, right? And then it becomes sort of, this is who we are as people. We don't accept immigrants, refugee children are not friends. Refugee children are not to be associated with. So adults attitude impact children, because South African children learn through socialization. If we don't socialize them well and ethically and morally engaging with children across all immigration statuses.
You've existed outside South Africa, and you made reference to the States there. I wonder if you've experienced any form of discrimination as do you say migrant or immigrant?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. You see, I was in a small school town, university town, right? It's extremely elite, this university town that I was in, right? And I remember I was there when America was voting between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And I'm the only one who thought Donald Trump was going to win. And the reason for that is, unlike my friends and my colleagues, unlike my community, right? I was taking the public bus. I was talking to people in public. So I kind of had an appreciation of what people outside of the elite bubble were saying. And so it was very elitist town. And so I personally, what is it called? Attracted more positive interest than negative. I actually don't recall a time when I attracted negative attention because I was an immigrant, and people could identify that I'm not from the US by my accent immediately. And so I've kind of like a fun story. People were like, so I was in the US for 6 years, and people kept asking me, why did you have an American accent? And I said, well, American people loved my accent. So I kept it as an in with people, right? And they would always say, I'm not even kidding. They would be like, I could sit and listen to you the whole day. And so, but that's the kind of positive interest that I got. And then, of course, if I said out South Africa, Cape Town came up, Johannesburg came up, Nelson Mandela came up, Desmond Tutu came up. So really positive things about me as a South African, and really eagerness to engage with me and participate with me positively, right? And so it would be false for me to say I experienced direct racism or discrimination or some kind of exclusion.
Did you feel some sort of a secondary discrimination? I say secondary discrimination because I don't know what that is. It's a term I'm making up now. But you mentioned that somebody said to you, I could sit and listen to you the entire time. Did such statements move you in a way?
No, I felt like, look, it enabled me to connect with people. So it was generally positive, right? And so what they were saying is that my accent is lovely, right? And I got that all the time. So it really enabled me. So it was positive. It was positive. It was just people saying, your accent is so lovely and so rich. I really can listen to you talk the whole day, right? So for me, I got the connections were positive. If I said I'm from South Africa, somebody will say, oh, I've been to Johannesburg, or I've been to Cape Town, and they'll start talking about South Africa in a positive manner because they've experienced it as tourists and they have experienced it in a positive manner. Or somebody will start talking about Nelson Mandela or Desmond Tutu. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission is very common. They study it in American history. They study Nelson Mandela in American history. And so those are very positive thing, right? And then they've got the South Africans saying that Hillary Clinton, I think it's African. Well, Hillary Clinton, but we use it quite a bit in South Africa. You know, it takes a village to raise a child. And Hillary Clinton made it popular in the US, and it's known as a South African proverb. So, you know, it was generally positive connections with me as a South African. Yes. So the sadness that I experienced was for some of my African American friends to sit in class and to hear their experiences of the US was quite hard. And so I could not identify with their struggles, but I made it a point to stand in solidarity with them, whatever they did in the moment. And so, yeah, I could sympathize with the struggles and the pains. And I was there while the Black Lives Matter movement started, and so it was interesting to witness that, and to witness the trauma that my African American brothers and sisters were going through because of the George Floyd experience, and of course the subsequent experiences that got revealed from them.
Sorry, you're taking me back. I actually lost a friend who was in Miami. His name was Lindani, and falsely accused of something and shot.
Yeah, I remember the story. Wow, yeah.
Yeah, he was a very good friend of mine, went to the same school, and one of those people that everybody looked up to. Hence, I think he was on the other side. And yeah, I don't know if I can say anything positive about America and Black Africans in particular. I'm not saying that they treat us badly and whatnot. I'm not here to criticize, but I think from what I've seen, how they receive us isn't as how we normally receive them, and I think it's a bit unfair.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, I was kind of in an elitist school town, where, you know, most of the population are really progressive people. You know, again, it's a college town, so most people have high education, and most people are incredibly smart. Most people are incredibly global. And so, like I said, I don't know what my experiences would have been if I wasn't in that elitist town. It's extremely, everybody's progressive, everybody's smart, everybody's intelligent, everybody's well-traveled. So people's cross-cultural interactions are sort of the norm for them, right? And so I think I was privileged in that I was sheltered from that, because I lived in an elitist town. Yeah.
Suppose you are one of the refugee children that you focus your research on. Let's say you are in Gaza right now, or in a similar setting, where there's bombings, there's whatever. Can you? You are 5 years old at this point. Can you tell me how you think your next 15 years of life would be like?
Okay. Yeah. So typically, on average, if you are 5, you will most likely spend the majority of your next 15 years being internally displaced. Most refugees are internally displaced, which means they don't go across their own country's border. They simply relocate to a different part of the country where it's a little bit more stable, because there are no resources, right, to move from your own country to another country. Then immigration is border control is extremely strict. So even if you reach the borders, you to cross is really dangerous. And what we're seeing now is that a lot of parents and a lot of caretakers are handing over their children to human traffickers in the hopes that they will deliver them to a country that is safe, right? And so the border itself has got such a lot of challenges that a lot of people don't go across their own country. So most of the refugees are what we call internally displaced. So your own community, your own village, your own town has been completely destroyed, and you are going to relocate to a different town in your country that's at least still standing. Now, that is a temporary arrangement, and people live in temporary setups, right? And so people have to literally live in limbo and temporarily in all aspects, right? Documentation, if you don't have documentation, you cannot do so many things. And for children, that includes going to school. So as a 5-year-old, you're most likely, you are living in a temporary shelter. It can be inside your own country or outside your own country. And that happens for a very long time, right? And that can happen not for months, it can happen for years, right? So give it 7-8 years, you are in temporary living, right? And then in temporary living, a couple of things can happen. You can apply for asylum in a host country, where a country takes you in. They give you refugee status. You become legalized. You have all your paperwork, and then you can begin to resettle in that country. And then resettlement, let's say the next 7 years, that's where the daily stresses come in, right? And so you can spend a lot of time being stressed. So for refugee children, the stress spans across a number of years because of the migration patterns. They just don't move from their own communities immediately into safety. No, they move from their own communities to internal communities of displacement, external communities of displacement, until they're given asylum. That's for the majority of children. And remember that some children will travel alone, where they've lost family members due to war, and then they'll be given asylum in the new country, and with what we call unaccompanied minors.
And in those protected spaces, as I would imagine, they are protected spaces. What is the treatment if you look into literature? How are they taken care of?
Yeah, so those protected spaces, I would actually say, so temporary resettlement spaces, they depend on humanitarian agencies, and because they're temporary resettlement, they're not equipped for optimal functioning of human beings. You know, the expectations and the design in such a way that people are transitioning. It's meant to be a space of transition, but unfortunately, due to different immigration laws and countries unable to take in everybody at the same time, those resettlement centers, unfortunately, children live in them longer than they should. You know, so they can lack basic necessities, right? So from safe water, electricity is, to lack of electricity, to being exposed to the weather elements, to being exposed to diseases. And then, of course, because it's short-term, they're designed for short-term resettlement, the capacity for treatment is not a lot, right? So all medical treatment, including mental health treatment, is not sufficient because they're not designed to be there for a long time. So where there is medical health treatment, it's normally very brief, just to decrease or just to decrease the immediate distress, but it's not long term. And I want to make this point, Dr. Scruffy, about treatment of children's mental health. It's not one-dimensional, it's multidimensional. And so I learned very quickly when working with refugee populations that you would assume that they immediately want to treat post-traumatic stress disorder because of the war that they've been through. But what I've found is that a lot of them first want to make sure that the daily needs are met, right? Because they want to move on. They look forward to healing. They look forward to really getting a better life, and they don't want to waste the opportunity. And so we have to be really careful as psychologists that we are sensitive and in tune to what the refugee child who's sitting in front of us needs. Some of them, what will decrease the distress is school shoes, right?
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
as opposed to cognitive behavioral therapy, because you can do cognitive behavioral therapy, but if the child does not have school shoes, they will perpetually be stressed until they find school shoes.
Good. Before you continue there, and that's where I actually wanted to go. Then in your research, you speak about culturally responsive therapy. And I want to know why particularly this form of therapy and what does it mean? I also want you, in your response, to indicate how it differs from cognitive behavioral therapy, which you just mentioned, and focused therapy, emotionally focused therapy.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So, culturally behavioral therapy and emotional focused therapy, narrative therapy, solution focused therapy, structural family therapy, those are therapeutic modalities, right? So those are therapeutic ways that therapists can use to address client distress or client need, right? And so, for example, I typically use structural family therapy and I use solution focused therapy to address my clients' needs. And they've all got what they think are the most important things to address in therapy, right? So, and then culturally responsive therapy is a framework that says it doesn't matter what therapy modality you use, whether you use cognitive behavioral therapy, emotion-focused therapy, solution-focused therapy, those therapy modalities need to be adapted to be culturally responsive to the population that you're working with. So when you are using cognitive behavioral therapy, are the techniques that are using, are they culturally sound? Are they culturally appropriate for the person that's sitting across of you? And if they're not, how are you adapting them? And some of these modalities have been adapted for different cultures, right? And if they've been adapted and validated for that culture, that's perfectly fine. So for solution-focused therapy, for example, we ask, we have different questions that we ask. So for example, we say to a person, if you had those balls that they use in that show the future.
The crystal balls.
Yes, if you had a crystal ball, what would you see in your future? You see, for a Black child, they might not know what a crystal ball is, right? And so but the point of that question is, what kind of future do you envision? What kind of future do you dream about, right? And it's to inspire and encourage thinking about positive and a resilient future. You can adapt that question, still make the same point, but adapt that question to metaphors and that are appropriate to the population that is sitting across from you. So that's the culturally responsive therapy framework. It's a framework that encourages therapists to use culturally sensitive and culturally nuanced technique, whatever modality that they're using. Adapt the modalities to be culturally sound to the participant, to the clients that you are helping.
Very fair, very fair. I'm thinking now, we take the children out of these protected spaces. Now they can go to school. You get to a classroom, you've experienced all this for the past 3 years. Discrimination, violence, all these negative terms. You get to a classroom, a space where you see your peers. People are jubilant, they are playing. So this seems to be more of a safe space than anything. But then you get discriminated again when you get to the space. You are called words. In our case, if it's a South African, maybe a K word, for instance, or if you're in the United States, you're a Negro. Yeah, I won't say it as it is. How does that affect the psyche of the learner? And what happens in instances where we don't have these school therapists, psychologists that you write about? Because I think in many cases we don't have them. I know we have these conversations even here in South Africa, but I've never seen one. I sit with teachers at home. Not even once have I heard about school psychologists.
Yeah, I think the most devastating outcomes of name calling is that it immediately diminishes the opportunities for the child to thrive.
Yeah.
Right. And so taking away that space for the child to thrive, number one. You might have children that are really good in school, but because they've been labeled, it might negatively impact their self-esteem and their self-worth. So a child will not participate as much as they ought to, because they feel unwanted in this space. They feel rejected in that space. And so it diminishes their capacity to participate in school, for sure. I think that's the most devastating impact.
And what can teachers do in this case?
Yeah, I think teachers can be allies and advocates. I think we should remember that we're talking about children. And we should remember that displaced populations such as refugee. Now in South Africa, we have a challenge with terminology, right? We cluster all immigrants under one label, right? And really, there are different types of immigrants, right? The economic immigrants that we have a lot of in South Africa, and they're undocumented, right? And then we also have refugee populations. And refugee population, the definition by law is that it's a person who becomes displaced due to founded fear and due to persecution of some sort, right? So these people are persecuted in their own country and they've got no choice to leave. And that's who refugees are. And refugee children and immigrant children did not have a choice but to relocate to where either the war have led them or circumstances have led them. And so I think as adults, we should have an appreciation that we are talking about children who are living under circumstances that are not by their own choice. And then we should also remember that creating the opportunity for these children is creating a good future for them, right? And they can really make a difference in their own lives and in the lives of their communities, and definitely they can grow up and become productive citizens of the country. And the opposite is true, where if we diminish their self-worth, if we diminish their self-esteem and add to cumulative trauma, we really impede on their development to become healthy adults and productive communities of our members. So teachers should be allies. Teachers should be allies and advocate for these children, right? And this is not saying refugee children are more special than other children. To say, when you advocate for the local children, advocate for the refugee children. When you see that a refugee child has a specific need, go out of your way to meet that need. The same way that you will see, when you see an extraordinary need in a South African children, you'll go out of the way to meet that need. Be inclusive. And we make a big deal of inclusive education in South Africa. It includes all vulnerable children, right? So discrimination, don't discriminate against child based on the gender, the ethnicity, the religion, the refugee, the immigration status as well. So really, teachers should be allies to to these kids, and they should be advocates for these children as well.
You're making me think there. In Durban, we have oh God, the name is escaping me. But we've got a refugee center. It's in a Catholic church, I think. Yeah. And I wonder what the role of the general society, the community, could be in trying really to meet what refugees go through halfway.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I think I'm gonna go back to what is a personal value, is for the community, for people to choose to do one thing differently and do something differently, or do something positive for one refugee child. Right. And I think that that will make the biggest impact. Now, political rhetoric, it's something in the political realm, and it's used in politics for political agendas, right? But as community members on living with these kids, we can help one refugee child. And if each of us helps one refugee child in the way that we can, from advocating to them to get into a school, to helping them with basic needs, to a friendly face and inclusive person, warm person, having good relationships with them, I think that communal spirit of Ubuntu can then benefit refugee kids.
And maybe as a last question, how friendly are we, our schools now? How friendly are we when it comes to receiving refugee children here in South Africa?
Yeah, you know, the schools are extremely overwhelmed. You know, South African schools are extremely overwhelmed. There is a lack of resources for everyone. You know, there are insufficient resources for the local kids, and so when schools receive immigrant children, it can seem like an additional burden, and so it can seem additionally stressful. So I think the ecological stress that teachers and school administrators are going through is not creating an environment where children with extra needs or extraordinary needs can easily be welcomed. I think that so that's the challenge, is that refugee children can seem like they're an additional burden to schools. But I think a paradigm shift is needed. Refugee children are simply children with different needs, right? It's the same as if you have children in communities that are filled with gang violence, and now they are becoming part of gangs. You know, how's the school going to deal with that, right? These are children who have extraordinary needs as well. So the school needs to address that and make space for that. The school cannot just ignore that, right? And so not to compare apples with oranges. It's not a comparison. It's simply an illustration that whether kids are local or kids are immigrant, extraordinary needs should be addressed, and children should not be discriminated against because of the type of need that they have.
I ask this because in one school in KZN, and this thing was on the news, there's a kid from Limpopo that moved to one of the communities in KZN. One, was rejected by the community, and two, when they got to school, the school leadership, school management did not receive the learner well.
Yeah.
Some of the teachers and the learners would say, aswafundi ama kwere or amashangane. I think they used one of those two terms. I can only imagine how it is like for people that are not native South Africans if we can do it to somebody who comes from a different province.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because, someone from a different province might have the option to go back to Limpopo, might have, perhaps the parents get a job and they might have the opportunity to go to a school that's more inclusive. But for refugee children, the options are extremely limited. And the option of going back for children, especially displaced by war, are close to non-existent. And so they rely on the ethical and the moral inclusivity of humanity. Yeah.
Hmm. I know I said I was asking you a last question, I think 50 million years ago, but uh, well, why aren't we seeing psychologists in our districts?
Yeah.
Why is it so hard for us to see the presence of psychologists, educational psychologists in schools?
Yeah, yeah, there is not enough. There are many needs and limited professionals, and the professionals are often not enough per district. So they exist and they're accessible, but the needs overcome the capacity.
Doc, thank you very much. I think this has been a wonderful conversation. I truly appreciate you honoring my invite. It's a great pleasure. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Dr. Q. This was a great conversation, and thank you for having me. Have a good day.
You too. Thanks.
Thank you.